resuscitation can be evaluated, but I would argue it's not as easy as evaluation in other goals of South-South cooperation. And finally, the sustainability of these projects might also be threatened by lack of resources and changes in the political landscape, both of Brazil and of partner countries. As right now we're in the middle of a very significant economic crisis, obviously resources that are directed towards South-South cooperation go down. And if you're talking about a long-term project that has been set in place a few years ago, then that might be very problematic because it might compromise the very goals of these projects. Let me briefly show you how Brazilian South-South cooperation in health has been channeled through international organizations and multilateral sources. So this is the expenditures with the Pan American Health Organization and the World Health Organization from 2011 to 2013. It has fallen 2012, as the figure shows. However, for the three-year period, it amounts to about 5 billion reais, which in dollars would be over $1 billion, which is very significant. And if we put that in the context of Brazilian international development cooperation overall, this table shows how it reached a peak in 2010. Over 900 million US dollars was spent that year, and this was largely due to the earthquake in Haiti. Since then, again, because of economic crisis, it has gone down considerably. But it's not very easy to grasp what concerns health in this table, because this table has the total of Brazilian South-South cooperation expenditures, and it also breaks it down by modalities, but none of these modalities refer exclusively to health. Actually, most of the health projects would be in the technical cooperation, but we also have some in humanitarian cooperation and refugees, and obviously also expenditures with international organizations. And here it also should be mentioned that the resources that Brazil gives to support these international organizations goes first to the UN system as a whole, to its secretariat, but next it's the World Health Organization and the Pan American Health Organization. So again, here, when it comes to international organizations, health figures very prominently in Brazilian international cooperation. And I'll stop here because I believe my time's over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. That was very informative, and I think you've raised some very important issues in terms of how does the domestic inform the foreign policy, but I think it's also about adapting to your conditions and what works within a local and whether or not you can adapt it to a broader context. But I think the Brazilian health example is instructive, if not informative, about both the opportunities and the challenges with the current political issues that are unfolding there. Our next speaker is Dr. James. He's with the RIS, and I invite him to take the floor and give him 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chairperson, and my esteemed co-panelists. My focus is healthcare sector cooperation, but I'm looking at the issues in a general way, but based on the Indian experience during the last 5 decades. One fundamental principle is that health is one of the foundational sectors of national development. Whatever happens to the health of the people ultimately affects the productivity of the economy and the national development. So therefore, any program you are addressing into health is to be taken as a program for economic and social development, and not merely to be limited to the social development aspect of it. So in fact, we were discussing this thing internationally also in the 2015 India-Africa Summit. If you look into the declaration, there it was very clearly stated that health is critical to the development of human capital, which drives socio-economic growth. This perception is what has shaped the India's policies towards health, both domestically and internationally. Now, when we are thinking of the challenges which health is facing today, the most important thing which all countries are committed is to achieve universal health and well-being, at least by the year 2030. And these challenges, they will vary from country to country depending on, because some countries have already achieved many of the targets of maternal mortality rates or child mortality, but there are countries which are lagging behind it too much, I would say, when we are talking about a 70 rate for maternal mortality, and there are countries with 793 as of today. So how to carry all of them, these things. And then there are countries who might have achieved it, but they have the problems of non-communicable diseases, cardiac problems, cancer, then also mental distress and all that. So in a way, if you look at it, every country has got something or the other kind of a challenge in the universal these things. And coming to most of the developing countries, the challenges will be in 4 areas. First is the infrastructure. Many do not have adequate number of hospitals, dispensaries, or even primary health center. And then second, of course, goes with the human resources. Where are the people to man those things? What kind of a quality they have these things? And third one, which normally gets a lot of attention everywhere, both domestically and internationally, is the medicines, availability of access, affordability. This issue is there, and also the quality. And a fourth one, which has not been given so much attention in the past, is the diagnostics. The medical devices, how these things are there. Now, what should South-South and triangular cooperation do to address these issues? I mean, given this last so many decades, there are a lot of experience in partnerships, and many lessons could be drawn from that. I am particularly thinking of India's experience, because India's health partnerships were mostly in African countries. There is this Pan-African e-network that is covering 53 countries of Africa. And here it is a use of technology. Telemedicine is a major component of this program. Provision of services in remote and difficult conditions, and tailoring solutions regardless of the remoteness of the place is a major achievement of this project. See, specialists in super specialty hospitals, both in India and Africa, the African super specialty was selected by the African Union, so also all these primary centers were there. They are accessible to consultants, say for consultancies for doctors and patients in remote areas. And that assurance that there is a specialist available at any moment virtually, that's a kind of a great morale booster for the doctors, particularly in the remote areas of this thing. So some of the lessons which one could find from this thing is that, one, the projects should be oriented to the felt needs of the South and their particular country of that things, and they should draw it up. That should be the ownership, should be local ownership. This is one of the cardinal principles which India has been putting into these things. Then one can have innovative approaches to reduce the cost by judicious use of technology. In the morning there was reference to artificial intelligence. This is one such one can very well use it. Never shy away from technology. Well conceived and properly implemented projects using high technology need not necessarily be costly. In fact, it would be mostly the other way if you take a long-term perspective of this thing. Then a kind of multi-sectoral approach should be used. In this Pan-African e-network, what we did was we clubbed education also with these things. There was a provision for education, there was provision for health, medical education, and also for governance part of it. So combining all these things helped the achievement of the objective of the scheme. Then another thing is how to build the local capacity. I will mention few examples of that thing in the subsequent these things. Then, of course, Andre mentioned about the issue of intellectual property rights. When we think of particularly access to medicines and other things, this poses major these things. You all know that in the TRIPS agreement, provisions were made, flexibilities are there, enabling developing countries and others to use any of those measures for public health these things. But when such measures are being used, what is happening is a lot of political and economic pressures are being exerted on those countries maybe because of lobbying by the pharmaceutical firms and other things, and insisting that they stop it on that. Say, for example, I mean, the number of users of compulsory licenses, you could see. So far, India has used it only once, Thailand once for 3 cases, and Brazil also once. That's all. All this after 1994, the provisions were made. It is 2018, so far we are used. So you know how the lay of the land is there. And then there itself has this thing. India has, in fact, showed this thing, how the patent regime can be oriented towards the need for a developing country by including a provision on Section 3D, which is against evergreening, so that generics could come into the market at the earliest and all those things. Then, of course, one major concern nowadays one finds not only in India but other countries also is that access to the latest technology, particularly in the field of pharmaceuticals. And this sector is now witnessing a major shift from this chemical-based drugs to biological pharmaceuticals. And most of the South lack the technology to develop these products and compete with the developed world. Some do not even have the capacity to absorb the technology. They can only import the products. So what can be done on this thing? There's need to develop this thing about it. And that is where I would say the local production capacity, technology transfer, etc. In fact, I would expect Andre to refer to the Maputo experience, which Brazil did in Mozambique to create a local technology development. We did it, our own, one of the private sector, CIPLA, they started joint ventures in many countries in Africa so that the technology reaches there. It is not a question of export market for this country. Then, of course, one area where normally attention people don't pay much, but we have been paying is traditional medicine. We all talk about the modern medicine, but the traditional systems of medicine like India's Ayurveda or China's system of medicine, these are all well-established systems with their own separate pharmacopoeia and all that, and thousands of years. And the medical education itself is running into many years. It is not that just any hacker comes into and does it. So an appropriately integrated traditional system of medicine with modern healthcare can improve wellness of people and many a time reduce the cost of treatment. See, the main good thing with these systems is they are developed indigenously and they are more suited to the target population, both generally from a physiological angle, and they are also generally free from harmful adverse effects having been proven over centuries of use, unlike the modern system where, for example, now we are finding the antimicrobial resistance. In fact, the latest target is how to overcome antimicrobial resistance. These are the systems which have been in operation for thousands of years, and this issue comes up in a few decades, antimicrobial resistance. So this is where how these systems can be integrated, what can the South do on these matters, that is something we will have to look into and brigade this thing. Now, coming to the conclusion, let me draw a few general lessons from the past experience and what we can do. One is draw up projects based on the felt needs of the locally felt needs. It's not in a, one size fits all, that will not. This is what the South has always been advocating, one size fits all will not go. Particularly in the WTO negotiations, this was the main call by the South. So here also we'll have to follow that pattern. Then adopt innovative technology-enabled multi-sectoral strategies, as I was mentioning about the Pan-African e-network, where we used it to reduce the cost and increase the effectiveness. Artificial intelligence can be very well used, particularly to tackle human resource-related issues in many of these things. They can work in areas where humans will find it tough to go and to stay on and all those things. They can be very well used in the diagnostic things, medical device sector and all those. Then we were talking about intellectual property. That is where concerted action on international fora is still required. And also in discussions on access related to biodiversity, traditional knowledge use and all that. That is where the South-South and trilateral cooperation should come to the fore and influence the international policy making and all that. Then, of course, the biopharmaceuticals, what we need is, instead of a vertical kind of transfer of technology will not happen, we need to say that horizontal kind of transfer and the cooperation among the equal partners, that is what it would do, and develop local capacity. That's it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor James. I think you've really sketched out a very comprehensive and insightful plan of how India deals with its health care cooperation. I particularly enjoyed the Pan-African E-Network as an example with Africa as an innovation. And also to say that I think traditional medicine is becoming more and more a choice of alternates in Africa as well. And it bode well in terms of the cross-references with the Brazilian case study. Now let me hand over to Ambassador Balakrishnan, and he has 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all. Let me begin by, since the other panelists have focused largely on the health sector, let me focus a bit on the wider aspects of science and technology cooperation in the South-South context. Since we also have to discuss the theoretical perspectives. So what are the areas of importance in